For many centuries, towering aqueducts cut across European countrysides. Silent arches and half-buried roads hinted at a vanished world. This grand civilization once spanned from Britain's windswept shores to the sands of Syria. Yet much of its story lay locked behind rubble and erosion. In 1748, explorers near the Bay of Naples uncovered an astonishing window into that past. The buried city of Pompeii, buried by volcanic ash in AD 79, Pompeii remained remarkably intact, offering modern eyes a glimpse of Roman streets, frescoes, and everyday life frozen in time. Excavators found graffiti scrawled on walls, intact mosaics, and even loaves of bread turned into charcoal. These finds, like clues from an ancient puzzle, ignited a renewed fascination with Rome's monumental achievements, its law, architecture, vast dominion, and dramatic collapse. Yet Pompeii was just one piece of a far larger tapestry spanning over 1,000 years, from the half-mythic founding by Romulus in 753 BCE to the empire's final stand in Constantinople nearly 15 centuries later. The Romans, military conquerors, master builders, masterful politicians, shaped the contours of Western civilization, transmitting laws, language, and cityscapes that endure in our modern world. This is the story of how a small community by the Tiber grew into a republic, then an empire, and finally transformed into the Byzantine realm that guarded Roman identity in the East. We begin with the Regal Age, when kings purportedly ruled over mud brick walls and small temples, setting the stage for the mighty republic that would follow. Long before Rome became an empire, it existed as little more than a cluster of huts in central Italy. Legends trace its origins to Aeneas, a Trojan hero who supposedly fled the burning city of Troy, journeyed across the Mediterranean, and settled in Latium. The Romans of later centuries cherished this myth to connect themselves to Homer's epic world. More concrete is the story of Romulus and Remus, two sons of the war god Mars, abandoned at birth and suckled by a she-wolf. In 753 BCE, so the legend goes, Romulus founded Rome atop the Palatine Hill, fortifying it with a makeshift wall and eventually killing his brother in a dispute. Romulus became the city's first king. Archaeology aligns somewhat with these legends, though stripped of mythic gloss. Excavations suggest that by the mid-8th century BCE, scattered Iron Age hamlets on the Palatine and surrounding hills began merging into a proto-urban settlement. Ladial pottery shards, post-hull remains of wattle and daub huts, and evidence of simple burials all point to a community forging an identity. Nearby cultures influenced these settlers. Etruscans to the north introduced sophisticated engineering, religious rites that revolved around divination, and possibly the practice of building grand city walls. Meanwhile, Greek colonies in southern Italy, Magna Graecia, brought literacy, trade networks, and artistic motifs. Traditional Roman history lists 7 kings spanning 753 to 509 BCE. Though partially legendary, these figures illustrate how Rome's monarchy evolved. Romulus, the founder who established Rome's first institutions. Think of the Senate as an advisory council, the division of citizens into tribes for military purposes, and the earliest religious rites. Numa Pompilius, credited with shaping much of Rome's religious identity, the Vestal Virgins, the cult of Terminus, early priesthoods. A Sabian by origin, he supposedly replaced warlike impulses with piety and law. Tullus Hostilius, a warrior king who annexed neighboring Alba Longa, doubling Rome's population. Stories say he built the Curia Hostilia, a proto-senate house. Ancus Marcius, grandson of Numa, focused on bridging religious tradition with expansion. Tradition credits him with founding the port of Ostia at the Tiber's mouth, ensuring better salt trade and maritime access. Tarquinius Priscus, the first Etruscan king, introduced advanced engineering. For instance, the Cloaca Maxima, an early sewer to drain marshy lowlands. Servius Tullius, respected for reorganizing Rome's social and military structure into centuries. He also demarcated the city's pomerium, sacred boundary, and is said to have built the Servian Wall. Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, the last king, a tyrant who neglected tradition, executed rivals, and provoked outrage. His son's alleged assault of the noblewoman Lucretia led to revolt by outraged aristocrats. Though modern historians suspect some kings were conflations or political fictions, the overall narrative stands. Rome's monarchy grew more sophisticated under Etruscan influence, focusing on major building projects, temples on the Capitoline Hill, drainage of the Forum, and structured religious rites. By the late 6th century BCE, Rome was forging an urban identity, bridging native Latin, Etruscan, and Greek influences. As legend holds, Tarquin the Proud reigned oppressively, ignoring the Senate and flouting time-honored customs. The catalyst for his downfall was the tragic story of Lucretia, a virtuous noblewoman raped by Tarquin's son. She killed herself in shame, spurring leading aristocrats, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, to drive out Tarquin's family and declare that Rome would never again suffer a king. In 509 BCE, the monarchy ended, replaced by a new political system known as the Res Publica, or Republic. While some details are undoubtedly embellished, a genuine political transition did occur in the late 6th century. Etruscan domination waned across Latium. Local elites sought more autonomy, and a power shift in Rome gave authority to consuls and the Senate. This moment, historically anchored around 509 BCE, stands as the symbolic birth of the Roman Republic. The monarchy's memory lingered in Rome's hatred of the word rex, or king. For centuries, any would-be tyrant risked the label king and the violent reaction it entailed. Though the Republic would distance itself from kingship, many institutions begun under the monarchy persisted. Religious offices, the Pontifex Maximus, the use of city walls for defense, and the Senate's evolving role as a guiding council. Roman historians in later eras romanticized these things. Romulus revered as the founder, Numa as the pious legislator, Servius Tullius as the champion of the common folk. The monarchy also left behind vital cultural elements from Etruria, arch building techniques, the layout for temples facing south, and complex rituals of augury that required reading the flight of birds to interpret divine will. As Rome shook off the final Tarquin, it did so fueled by a deep sense of civic pride. This emerging Roman identity would only strengthen in the coming centuries of the Republic. But first, the city had to forge a system of governance without a single ruler at the top, a challenge that would define the next chapter of Roman history. After expelling the last king, Romans established a republic that distributed power among officials elected annually. Instead of a monarch, they created two consuls, each serving a single-year term to lead armies and preside over civic affairs. The notion was to prevent any individual from acquiring king-like power. The Senate, once an advisory body, gained increased prestige as a central policy-making council. Meanwhile, popular assemblies, the Centuriate Assembly and others, allowed citizens to vote on laws, elect magistrates, and influence major decisions like war declarations. Despite such egalitarian ideals, tensions flared between the powerful patrician families, aristocrats claiming ancestral religious and political privileges, and the vast majority of plebeians, commoners, including some wealthy non-aristocrats. Patricians initially monopolized consulships, priesthoods, and judicial authority. Plebeians resented these inequalities, particularly as many served in the army without enjoying political representation or legal protection. From about 494 BCE onward, plebeians pressed for reforms. They staged secessions or strikes by withdrawing from the city to force concessions. Gradually, the patricians conceded key changes. Tribunes of the plebs, officials elected by plebeians endowed with sacrosanctity. It was forbidden to harm them, and veto power over unjust acts. The 12 Tables, 450 BCE. Rome's first written law code, ensuring transparency so that magistrates couldn't arbitrarily interpret unwritten custom. Though still harsh in some provisions, the 12 Tables were a milestone in establishing legal rights. Open magistracies. Over time, laws like the Lex Licinia Sextia, 367 BCE, allowed plebeians access to the consulship. Eventually, the dictatorship, censorship, and other high offices also became open. By 287 BCE, the Lex Hortensia made resolutions passed by the plebeian assembly binding on all Roman citizens, effectively eliminating the last patrician strongholds. This protracted struggle, called the Conflict of the Orders, pushed Rome toward a more inclusive aristocracy. In reality, wealthy plebeians often merged with patrician elites to form a new nobility that dominated politics. Yet commoners secured a recognized place in governance, and the concept of the tribune's veto became an important check on consular power. Simultaneously, Rome contended with hostile neighbors on the Italian peninsula. Control of Latium was solidified in the early 5th century, though occasional uprisings flared. By the mid-4th century, Rome engaged in repeated conflicts with the Volsci, Aequi, and especially the Samnites in southern and central Italy. The Samnite Wars, 343 to 290 BCE, were pivotal. These tough mountain tribes inflicted serious defeats on Roman legions, such as the battle at the Caudine Forks in 321 BCE, before eventually capitulating to Rome's resilient armies. Victory over the Samnites expanded Roman dominion deep into Campania and Apulia. This steady encroachment on Italian lands introduced Rome to new alliances and administrative methods. Conquered communities became allies or partial citizens with limited rights, while friendly city-states were granted local autonomy but expected to supply troops. Over time, these alliances integrated many Italians into a broader Roman sphere, foreshadowing how Rome would incorporate entire regions. By 300 BCE, Rome was no longer a small city-state, but a recognized power in central Italy, with a proven formula: well-disciplined legions, flexible alliances, and civic determination. An early sign of Rome's capacity for resilience came with the conquest of Veii, 396 BCE, an Etruscan city just north of the Tiber. The siege lasted years, but eventual success doubled Roman territory. Not long after, though, a Gallic tribe from the north, often called the Senones, defeated a Roman army at the Battle of the Alia, 390 BCE, then sacked Rome. The city's defenses collapsed, except for a last stand on the capital. Legend states that sacred geese alerted defenders to a Gallic night attack, thus saving the citadel. Though the Gauls eventually withdrew, some say they were bribed with gold. Roman historians dispute the details. The psychological impact was profound. Rome rebuilt its walls sturdier than ever, and never again forgot the threat from barbarian migrations. The memory of Gallic terror shaped Roman attitudes toward northern tribes for generations to come. By about 340 to 270 BCE, Roman territory encompassed much of central and southern Italy. Citizens gained farmland from conquered territories, fueling small-scale farming crucial to the Roman ethos of hardy soldier farmers. Wealth from war spoils financed roads like the Via Appia, built 312 BCE, connecting Rome to Capua and eventually Brundisium. Infrastructure improved commercial ties, tax revenues, and military logistics, enabling Rome's legions to march more swiftly across the peninsula. Yet wealth disparities also grew. Elite families accrued larger estates, sometimes at the expense of smaller farms, planting seeds of future social strife. But for the moment, the city thrived under a sense of collective identity forged by repeated battles. The Roman soldier found glory in expansions, and captured foes faced the choice of aligning with Rome or resisting and eventually succumbing to its unstoppable legions. By 264 BCE, Rome had subdued or allied most of the Italian peninsula. Only the Greek city of Tarentum in the south had offered staunch resistance, calling in Pyrrhus of Epirus 280 to 275 BCE to help. Though Pyrrhus initially bested Roman armies, he suffered heavy losses in so-called Pyrrhic victories and ultimately withdrew. The inevitability of Rome's progress was clear. No Italian power, Greek or otherwise, can match the city's organizational might, discipline, and methodical approach to war. Rome now stood at the threshold of the wider Mediterranean. Trade routes connected Italy to Carthage, Greece, and beyond. Conflicts of interest would soon arise, especially with Carthage, the dominant naval power of the Western Mediterranean. A fateful collision loomed, one that would elevate Rome from a regional powerhouse to a true Mediterranean empire. That confrontation, the First Punic War, commenced in 264 BCE and would forever alter Rome's destiny and shape of the known world. Rome's expansion had already brought it into occasional contact with Carthage, a wealthy Phoenician colony in North Africa with extensive maritime influence. When a skirmish in Messana, Sicily, erupted between local forces allied to Carthage and mercenaries requesting Roman help, Rome intervened. Conflict escalated into the First Punic War, the first of three titanic struggles. Lacking a navy at first, Romans hastily built fleets by copying a captured Carthaginian quinquereme. With typical ingenuity, they added a corvus, boarding bridge, that turned sea battles into infantry engagements. After intense campaigns around Sicily's coasts and sea routes, Rome eventually outlasted Carthage. By 241 BCE, Carthage sued for peace. Rome gained Sicily as its first official province. The war taught the Romans maritime warfare, taxed them severely, but also introduced them to the concept of overseas colonies and tribute. Seizing the opportunity while Carthage was weakened by a mercenary revolt, Rome annexed Sardinia and Corsica in 238 BCE, expanding its Mediterranean holdings. In the east, piracy in the Adriatic threatened Italian trade, prompting Rome to intervene in Illyria on the Balkan coast by the 220s. Each success further integrated new regions into Rome's orbit, with governors imposing taxes and Roman roads knitting them back to the Italian heartland. The greatest challenge soon came from Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian commander determined to avenge his city's earlier defeat. In 218 BCE, Hannibal famously led an army, including war elephants, across the Alps into Italy. Thus began the Second Punic War, arguably Rome's closest brush with annihilation. Hannibal's brilliant tactics culminated in staggering Roman defeats. Trebia, 218 BCE, Lake Transamine, 217 BCE, and worst of all, Cannae, 216 BCE. At Cannae, Hannibal encircled a much larger Roman force, destroying tens of thousands of legionnaires in a single day. Many Italian allies wavered or switched sides, convinced Rome was doomed. Yet Rome refused to surrender. Under the cautious strategy of Fabius Maximus, the delayer, they avoided direct confrontation, harassing Hannibal's supply lines. Meanwhile, Carthage's Spanish territories were threatened by Roman forces under the Scipio family. Over a decade of seesaw campaigns drained Hannibal's resources. Though he never lost a major land battle in Italy, he lacked reinforcements from Carthage. In 204 BCE, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later Africanus, launched an invasion of North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. At the decisive Battle of Zama, 202 BCE, Scipio triumphed using refined cavalry tactics and allied Numidian horsemen. Carthage surrendered again in 201 BCE, ceding Spain, paying huge indemnities and losing its navy. Rome emerged as the unchallenged hegemon of the Western Mediterranean, now controlling Spain, parts of North Africa, and the entire Central Sea. While Carthage fell, Rome also turned east. Greek city-states and successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great had long been locked in power struggles. Sensing an opportunity, Rome intervened in Macedonia under King Philip V, who had allied with Hannibal. A series of Macedonian Wars, 215 to 148 BCE, followed, culminating in the defeat of Philip V and his successor Perseus. By 168 BCE, Rome shattered Macedonian power at Pydna, ending the Antigonid monarchy. In Greece, Roman legions asserted dominance, famously destroying Corinth in 146 BCE to make a brutal statement. The same year saw Carthage razed to the ground in the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE. By mid-2nd century BCE, Rome had effectively tamed the entire Western Mediterranean and become a major factor in the Hellenistic East, eventually annexing Asia Minor territories like the Kingdom of Pergamon in 133 BCE into its provincial system. This expansion was not just military, but also cultural. Greek art, philosophy, and educators flooded into Italy, reshaping Roman high culture in what historians call Hellenization. Elite Romans studied Greek rhetoric, adorned villas with Greek statuary, and patronized Greek tutors for their children. Amid these conquests, the Roman Republic changed dramatically. Wealth poured in from war booty, tribute, and new trade networks. Leading generals like Lucius Aemilius Paulus, Scipio Aemilianus, or others gained personal prestige and fortune. Fueling the rise of aristocratic families who overshadowed older traditions of simplicity, enslaved labor arrived in droves, entire populations captured from Macedonia, Greece, or Spain. This labor fueled latifundia, large estates that pushed small farmers off their land. Many displaced peasants crowded into Rome, swelling the city's population, living in cramped insulae, apartment blocks, and depending on cheap grain from overseas. Politically, generals returning with triumphs gained extraordinary clout. The Senate struggled to govern these vast territories efficiently. Formerly short-lived magistracies couldn't cope with controlling provinces in Spain or Asia Minor. Governing powers were prorogued, creating proconsuls with extended commands who reigned almost like kings in their provinces. Ambitious men found ways to parlay success abroad into dominance at home. Growing inequality triggered discontent among poorer citizens, who saw the spoils of empire flowing to the top. Tribune positions in assemblies became tools for populist agitation. By 133 BCE, with Carthage destroyed and Macedon subdued, Rome's external threats seemed minimal, but the internal cracks were deepening. In that year, Tiberius Gracchus, a tribune from a distinguished family, proposed land reforms to redistribute public lands to small farmers. The Senate blocked him. Tiberius bypassed them by appealing directly to the plebeian assembly, shocking tradition. He was soon killed in a riot orchestrated by patrician senators. This open violence in the Forum marked a dire precedent. Lethal force replaced compromise. The expansion that had made Rome formidable also engendered slavery, wealth gaps, and new militarized culture. Veterans expected land grants, client armies formed around charismatic generals, and the old order of balanced power began to unravel. Still, at the moment in 133 BCE, none of that overshadowed the pride Romans felt in their conquests. The map from the Atlantic to the Greece recognized Roman supremacy. The Senate oversaw an empire of some 50 million people. Trade boomed in newly captured provinces. But the question remained, could a city-state's government, designed for local warfare and short annual magistracies, manage this sprawling empire? The next century would see if the Republic could adapt or collapse under its own success. From Tiberius Gracchus onward, tensions at home soared. Generals like Marius or Sulla, Pompey or Caesar would come to exploit and exacerbate these divisions. Before that upheaval, though, Rome still believed it was a republic of laws, having attained a commanding place in the Mediterranean. Soon, the very expansions that made it great would tear its old fabric, ushering in an age of civil wars and the final birth of the Roman Empire. In 133 BCE, Rome appeared at the peak of its power, dominating the western and central Mediterranean. But political and social strains rose sharply at home. The seeds of future civil wars were planted in these final decades of the Republic. As ambitious generals built personal followings, disenfranchised citizens seethed over land and wealth disparities, and the Senate struggled to keep its grip. By 27 BCE, the old republican framework would give way to an imperial system under a single ruler, Augustus. The crisis began with Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune in 133 BCE. He was appalled at how land-rich elites squeezed out small farmers, whose ranks once formed the backbone of Rome's legions. Tiberius proposed redistributing ager publicus, public land, to landless citizens, believing such measures would restore both military manpower and social stability. The Senate, dominated by wealthy landowners, resisted fiercely. When Tiberius bypassed them by placing his reforms directly before the plebeian assembly, the Senate orchestrated a mob to kill him. Over 300 supporters died as well, an unprecedented act of political bloodshed in the Forum. About a decade later, Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, continued the reforms. He expanded colonization, subsidized grain for urban poor, and tried to grant broader citizenship rights to Italian allies. Once again, senatorial elites panicked. In 121 BCE, the consul used a final decree, Senatus Consultum Ultimum, to quell Gaius's movement, resulting in Gaius's death and widespread executions. With these events, lethal violence became an accepted tool in Roman politics. The ideal of senatorial consensus gave way to factional conflicts and populist appeals. As overseas conquests grew, military commands became a source of wealth and power for Roman nobles. Two figures, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, embodied how generals could overshadow the Senate. Gaius Marius was a new man, novus homo, from outside the old aristocracy. Elected consul in 107 BCE, he earned fame defeating King Jugurtha of Numidia in North Africa. More crucially, Marius introduced major army reforms. Instead of limiting legionary service to land-owning citizens, he recruited the landless poor, offering them pay, equipment, and a chance at spoils. Legionnaires became professional soldiers, loyal not to the state, but to the general who secured their rewards. Marius, elected consul and unprecedented 7 times, then rescued Rome from Germanic invasions by the Cimbri and Teutones, 102 to 101 BCE. But his success planted the dangerous precedent of armies as personal power blocks. Shortly after, Sulla rose. A patrician, Sulla served under Marius in wars against Jugurtha and the Italian allies, the Social War 91 to 88 BCE. These allies demanded Roman citizenship, having fought alongside Rome for generations. The Social War ended in partial victory for the Italians, who mostly gained citizenship, yet the fighting produced generals with loyal armies, Marius and Sulla chief among them. When Sulla was granted command to war against Mithridates, king of Pontus in Asia Minor, Marius contrived to have that order transferred to himself. Outraged, Sulla marched on Rome in 88 BCE, the first time a Roman army occupied its own capital. He reinstated his command and left to defeat Mithridates. In Sulla's absence, Marius seized the city again, slaughtering opponents. On returning, Sulla won a bloody civil war, 82 to 81 BCE, installed himself as dictator, and unleashed proscriptions, lists of enemies declared outlaws, whose property was confiscated and who could be killed with impunity. Thousands died. Though Sulla eventually restored the Republic and resigned his dictatorship in 79 BCE, his actions revealed that raw force could trump tradition. The Senate, purged and reshaped, limped along, yet new challengers like Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar were poised to exploit the same militarized politics. Amid post-Sullan chaos, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey, earned acclaim subduing Marian factions in Sicily and Africa. By his late 20s, he demanded a triumph, a privilege typically for ex-consuls, and got it, underscoring how the normal rules bent for charismatic generals. Soon, Pompey gained glory defeating pirates in the Mediterranean in 67 BCE and conquering Mithridates in 66 to 63 BCE. Each success brought wealth to Rome and heightened Pompey's standing. Meanwhile, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, famously crushed the Spartacus slave rebellion in 71 BCE, but found himself overshadowed by Pompey's popularity. In 60 BCE, Crassus and Pompey aligned with a rising star, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, from an old patrician family tied to Marius by marriage, was a gifted orator and politician. He craved military distinction and saw that popular appeal could outmaneuver senatorial hostility. He forged a secret alliance, later called the First Triumvirate, with Pompey and Crassus. Pompey got land allocations for his veterans, Crassus got tax relief for his clients, and Caesar got a consulship in 59 BCE, plus command in Gaul. Over the next 9 years, 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar conquered all of Gaul, crossing the Rhine, even making a brief foray into Britain. The commentaries of the Gallic War he penned depicted a heroic figure extending Roman civilization northward, while capturing millions in war, reaping enormous spoils. Tensions mounted as Caesar's successes threatened Pompey's status. Crassus died fighting the Parthians at Carrhae in 53 BCE, unraveling the triumvirate. The Senate, swayed by Pompey, ordered Caesar to relinquish his Gallic command. Instead, in 49 BCE, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon with his legion, declaring the die is cast. This act ignited civil war, 49 to 45 BCE. Pompey and many senators fled to Greece, but Caesar pursued them, winning decisively at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated. Caesar then intervened in Egyptian politics, backing Cleopatra VII, with whom he formed both a political and romantic alliance. Over 2 more years, Caesar mopped up resistance in Africa and Spain, returning to Rome triumphant. Installed as dictator for 10 years, and soon dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, Caesar embarked on sweeping reforms. He extended citizenship to more provincials, restructured debts, enlarged the Senate, including non-Italian elites, reformed the calendar into the Julian calendar. His vision was an empire of shared governance under his guiding hand, but many senators feared monarchy's return, especially when Caesar allowed certain regal gestures, like wearing a purple robe, being worshipped in temples. On the Ides of March, 15 March 44 BCE, a conspiracy led by Brutus and Cassius ambushed him in the theater of Pompey, stabbing him to death. They claimed to act in defense of liberty, yet the aftermath spiraled into renewed chaos as popular outrage and power struggles overshadowed the conspirators' goal of reviving the Republic. In the vacuum, Caesar's grandnephew Octavian, later Augustus, Caesar's ally Mark Antony, and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE, launched brutal proscriptions against enemies, and eventually turned on each other. The final stage of civil wars concluded at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra. Antony's defeat ended by illusions of republican restoration. By 27 BCE, Octavian, now hailed as Augustus, was effectively the undisputed ruler. The ancient republic was dead, in all but name. When historians look back on 133 to 27 BCE, they see a period of intense transformation. Rome's empire ballooned, its wealth soared, but internal governance cracked under the burden of personal armies and aristocratic infighting. The tribunate and assemblies failed to mediate socio-economic crises. Ambitious generals discovered that loyalty from legions could outweigh senatorial law. Each civil war depleted the old republican virtues, leaving many Romans longing for stability over political freedom. The final victor, Augustus, would cleverly restore outward republican forms, yet hold absolute control, birthing the Roman Empire. The Republic's legacy survived only in name, overshadowed by the dawn of the Principate. When Julius Caesar fell to senatorial daggers in 44 BCE, Rome's immediate future looked grim. Senators like Brutus and Cassius, the so-called liberators, believed the Republic could be restored by removing its self-appointed dictator. Instead, they triggered renewed chaos. Mark Antony, Caesar's chief lieutenant, seized Caesar's papers and treasury. Crowds in Rome, outraged by Caesar's murder, turned against the liberators, who soon fled the city. Over the next decade, new alliances and betrayals would shape the final end of the Roman Republic, culminating in the rise of Caesar's heir as Emperor Augustus. Caesar's will shocked many by naming his 19-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, commonly called Octavian, as adopted son and chief beneficiary. Though untested, Octavian arrived in Italy to claim his inheritance. Mark Antony, older and battle-hardened, dismissed him as a mere boy. But Octavian quickly gained supporters among Caesar's veterans by promising them land distributions from Caesar's estate. Meanwhile, Antony, initially in control of Rome, lost popularity due to heavy-handed behavior. The Senate itself, led by Cicero, tried to manipulate Octavian against Antony in hopes of restoring senatorial authority. Antony marched north to confront Decimus Brutus, one of Caesar's assassins, besieging him at Mutina at 43 BCE. The Senate sent both consuls and Octavian with legions to relieve Brutus. Antony was defeated. Both consuls died in battle, leaving Octavian in command of the only viable army near Rome. Seizing the moment, Octavian demanded a consulship. When the Senate hesitated, he marched on Rome, forcing them to grant him the office at age 20. With that legitimacy secured, he pivoted to reconcile with Antony, realizing they shared more in common against the Senate and the liberators. In November 43 BCE, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, a lesser figure but a longtime ally of Caesar, formalized a Second Triumvirate, with the Lex Julia as law. This wasn't a private pact like the First Triumvirate. It was an official arrangement granting them near dictatorial power to restructure the state, override the Senate, and punish enemies. They unleashed proscriptions, an echo of Sulla's time, listing about 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians deemed traitors. These men were killed and their properties confiscated to pay the triumvirate's armies. Cicero, among the leading Republicans, famously fell victim to Antony's vengeance. With Italy terrorized into submission, the triumvirs turned to external threats. Brutus and Cassius had rallied supporters in the east. In 42 BCE, Antony and Octavian led a massive force across the Adriatic, meeting the liberators at Philippi in Macedonia. Two battles ensued. Brutus and Cassius both committed suicide. Hence, the Caesarian faction triumphed. In the settlement that followed, Antony took responsibility for the eastern provinces. Octavian took Italy, and nominally the West, including Spain. And Lepidus received Africa, though he would soon be sidelined. Antony settled in the east, seeking funds to pay his legions and stabilize chaotic provinces. He summoned Cleopatra VII of Egypt to Tarsus. Intrigued or enthralled by her famed charisma and also by Egypt's wealth, he aligned with her. Antony spent winters in Alexandria, fathered children with Cleopatra, and planned grand campaigns against Parthia. Their relationship scandalized many Romans. Cleopatra was perceived as a foreign queen manipulating Antony. Meanwhile, tensions with Octavian simmered, aggravated by Octavian's propaganda, painting Antony as neglecting Roman values. Octavian faced his own troubles in Italy, needing to fulfill veterans' land grants. This required dispossessing many Italian farmers, stirring unrest. He married Scribonia for a short-lived political alliance, then divorced her to marry Livia Drusilla, forging a tie with a prominent aristocratic family. As time passed, Octavian consolidated control in the West, building loyalty from soldiers and equestrians who saw him as a stable leader. Lepidus tried asserting authority in Sicily, but Octavian easily forced him into retirement in 36 BCE. By then, Octavian and Antony were co-rulers in name only. Antony launched a doomed Parthian campaign from 36 to 34 BCE that ended poorly. Seeking a second attempt, he formalized Cleopatra's role, even bestowing Roman territories on her children in a ceremony called the Donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. Octavian seized on this as evidence Antony was betraying Rome, planning an Eastern monarchy from Alexandria. The Senate, outraged, stripped Antony of titles and declared war. Not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. Thus, the final civil war took shape. In 32 BCE, Antony divorced Octavia, Octavian's sister, definitively severing ties. Antony and Cleopatra amassed forces in Greece, while Octavian advanced his general Agrippa's naval prowess. On the 2nd of September 31st BCE, the fleets clashed off Actium in western Greece. Cleopatra's squadron fled mid-battle, and Antony followed, leaving much of his fleet to surrender. Actium was a decisive blow. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. Octavian spent months securing the east before arriving at Alexandria. In August 30 of BCE, as Octavian closed in, the lovers committed suicide. Cleopatra famously via asp bite, according to legend. With no rivals left, Octavian annexed Egypt as a personal province, seizing its treasury. This windfall let him reward soldiers and shore up finances at home. Returning to Rome in triumph, Octavian faced the challenge of how to govern an empire still calling itself a republic while expecting strong leadership. Octavian spent the next few years demobilizing armies, settling veterans, and reconciling the Senate. He restored outward republic rituals, but in 27 BCE, he staged a political masterstroke. He returned extraordinary powers to the Senate, pretending to retire from dominating the state. The Senate, grateful and awed, conferred on him the honorific title Augustus, meaning the revered one, along with overarching proconsular authority. So began the Principate, an imperial system masked in republican veneers. Augustus carefully avoided the hated label Rex or King, preferring Princeps or First Citizen. The Senate still met. Consuls were still elected, but real power radiated from one man's command over provinces and legions. Thus, the Triumvirate era concluded with a sole victor. Through victory at Actium and subsequent consolidation, Octavian Augustus became Rome's first emperor. The tumultuous decades of civil wars had extinguished the old republic, fueling the public's craving for stable autocracy. Unwilling to repeat Caesar's brash approach, Augustus built a structure that gave enough deference to senatorial dignity while preserving his dominance. Rome now stood at the threshold of a new epoch, an era of imperial rule that would last for centuries under the guise of restored republican traditions. When Octavian emerged as sole ruler in 31 to 30 BCE, most Romans were weary of civil war. They craved peace and order. Octavian, newly styled as Augustus in 27 BCE, brilliantly exploited these sentiments, forging a political system historians call the Principate. He donned the mantle of first citizen while carefully accumulating enough power to guide every aspect of the state. This balancing act stabilized Rome for generations, inaugurating what would be remembered as the Pax Romana. In 27 BCE, with the Senate's permission, Octavian ostensibly surrendered his extra magisterial powers. The Senate, however, pressed him to accept broad authority for the empire's dangerous provinces, where legions were stationed. Augustus thereby gained imperium proconsulaire over key regions, Gaul, Syria, Egypt, retaining direct command of the bulk of Rome's legions. Meanwhile, he accepted the modest title Princeps Senatus, or leading senator. By presenting himself as a humble restorer of tradition, Augustus avoided the fate of Julius Caesar, who had flaunted perpetual dictatorship. Roman elites embraced the facade since it preserved senatorial rituals, magisterial elections, and the facade of a republican constitution. During this first settlement, Augustus secured a 10-year block of authority, renewable over frontier provinces. In 23 BCE, a second settlement followed when he gave up the consulship but accepted tribunician power, veto rights, and sacrosanctity, and maius imperium, or ultimate military command above all proconsuls. Over time, the Senate heaped more honors upon him, including Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland. Though he never called himself king, the concentration of power was unparalleled. Augustus reshaped the empire's administration. He reduced the bloated legions, left over from civil wars, to a stable core of around 28 legions, each with a long-service professional army. Soldiers served about 20 years. The empire's frontiers were garrisoned to deter invasions or rebellions. To discourage coups in Rome, he formed the Praetorian Guard, an elite bodyguard stationed near the capital. Financially, Augustus introduced direct taxation in provinces, replacing corrupt publicani contractors with salaried officials. He established the Aeraria Militare, a military treasury funded by inheritance taxes and other levies, ensuring veterans' pensions were systematically paid. This arrangement curbed the risk of mutiny by unpaid troops and freed provincial governors from having to juggle the burden of demobilized soldiers demanding lands. Keen on moral and social revival, Augustus enacted or reinforced laws promoting marriage and penalizing adultery or childlessness among the upper classes. He hoped to reverse the perceived decline in traditional virtue caused by civil wars and Hellenistic luxuries. The poet Horace wrote of moral renewal, while the Senate passed the Lex Julia de Adulteris in 18 BCE, criminalizing adultery. Some aristocrats resented these intrusions, but Augustus believed Rome's greatness hinged on strong families and disciplined citizenry. Culture flourished in his orbit. Virgil composed the epic Aeneid, linking Rome's destiny to Troy through Aeneas. Livy penned a monumental history, glorifying Roman values through the city's storied past. Ovid wrote witty love poetry, though his irreverent Ars Amatoria eventually clashed with the emperor's moral policy, leading to Ovid's exile. Patronage under Augustus or his ally Maecenas supported the arts, forging a golden age of Latin literature. Public works also signaled a new era of stability. Augustus famously boasted he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. He restored or erected over 80 temples, revived or reimagined the city's archaic shrines to demonstrate piety. The Ara Pacis, Altar of Peace, celebrated the Pax Romana he claimed to bring. He completed the Forum of Augustus, graced with a temple to Mars Altar, Mars the Avenger, fulfilling a vow after avenging Caesar's murder at Philippi. Roads and aqueducts multiplied, linking provinces more tightly to the capital. The city's population swelled toward 1 million inhabitants. Militarily, Augustus pursued cautious expansion. He annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, making it his personal province. He advanced Roman control in Spain, the Alpine regions, and the Balkans, pushing up to the Danube. However, a major setback occurred in 9 CE. The governor Varus led 3 legions into Germania beyond the Rhine. only to be ambushed and annihilated by the Teutoburg Forest by Arminius's Germanic Confederation. This shocking defeat ended plans for large-scale conquest in Germania. Augustus reportedly lamented, "Varus, give me back my legions." The frontier stabilized along the Rhine and Danube, marking a pragmatic boundary. Meanwhile, Augustus tempered aggression in the east, negotiating diplomatic settlements with Parthia. A major propaganda success was recovering legionary standards lost decades earlier by Crassus at Carrhae. Though not conquered, Parthia and surrounding states recognized Rome's influence. Augustus's foreign policy thus balanced expansion where feasible and defensive posture where prudent, forging a stable perimeter for the empire. The Principate's greatest vulnerability was succession. Augustus lacked a direct son, so he married his daughter Julia to potential heirs. First Agrippa, father of Gaius and Lucius Caesar, adopted his grandsons. Then Tiberius, his stepson. Both Gaius and Lucius died young. Ultimately, Tiberius was the only adult male relative capable of inheriting. After repeated family tragedies, Augustus grudgingly settled on Tiberius, granting him tribunician power so Rome would accept the transition. By the time Augustus died in 14 CE, he had ruled effectively for over 4 decades. The Roman world had known no other stable government. He was deified posthumously by decree of the Senate, an act revealing how thoroughly monarchy had crept back in all but name. Citizens cherished the Pax Augusta he established. Exhaustion with civil war made them overlook the disappearance of republican freedoms. Augustus's model, the Principate, would endure for centuries. An emperor concealing absolute power behind republican offices, controlling legions and foreign policy while maintaining a cooperative Senate. His skillful blend of tradition and innovation left a deep imprint. Pax Romana to the frontiers, moral and cultural revival, administrative coherence, and a dynasty in place. The Old Republic's final illusions persisted only as ceremonial tradition. Consuls were still elected, tribunes existed, and the Senate debated, but the emperor stood supreme. This ended the civil wars that had plagued Rome for nearly a century. The stage was set for the Julio-Claudian dynasty, beginning with Tiberius, who would both inherit Augustus's framework and test how robust it is when guided by less charismatic successors. Rome, accustomed to reading the flight of birds and the will of assemblies, now turned to the persona of each emperor, hoping the next would preserve peace and prosperity. When Augustus died in 14 CE, he left a blueprint for rule. Maintain a republican facade while wielding near absolute power. This system depended on each new emperor balancing senatorial cooperation with the army's loyalty. Yet from Tiberius to Domitian, varied personalities tested the Principate's resilience. Some used it adeptly, others plunged Rome into autocracy or chaos. Ultimately, the first 2 dynasties, Julio-Claudian and Flavian, revealed both the strengths and dangers of a hereditary imperial throne. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, succeeded smoothly. An experienced general in Germany, Tiberius initially governed well, preserving the treasury, avoiding costly wars, and entrusting local affairs to the Senate. He maintained frontier defenses effectively, delegated command to competent subordinates like Germanicus, a popular Julio-Claudian prince. Yet Tiberius's personality, taciturn, wary of flattery, alienated many elites. Over time, Tiberius grew more withdrawn. After his son Drusus died in 23 CE, he sank deeper into paranoia. He increasingly relied on his formidable Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, who manipulated treason trials to eliminate rivals. In 26 CE, Tiberius left Rome for the cliffs of Capri, rarely returning. Rome effectively fell under Sejanus's control, and senatorial fear grew. Eventually, Tiberius discovered Sejanus's ambitions. had him executed in 31 CE, but the atmosphere of suspicion remained. By the time Tiberius died in 37 CE, he had preserved Augustus's structures, but left a legacy tainted by fear and secrecy. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, better known by the name Caligula, Little Soldier's Boot, was Tiberius's grandnephew. At first, his accession thrilled Rome. He was a grandson of Germanicus, had a gracious manner, and ended Tiberius's treason trials. Yet months into his reign, he fell gravely ill. Ancient authors claim that after recovering, his behavior veered into extravagance and cruelty. Some stories, like naming his horse Incitatus, a consul, or waging a nonsensical campaign on the seashore, might be exaggerated or invented by hostile senators, but they underscore the era's shock. Caligula emptied the treasury on lavish spectacles, forced prominent citizens to humiliating roles, and demanded worship of himself as a living god. His unpredictable tyranny alienated both senators and a Praetorian Guard. In 41 CE, officers of the Guard assassinated Caligula in a palace corridor, also killing his wife and infant daughter. The Senate briefly considered restoring the Republic, but the Praetorians had other plans. The Guard discovered Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding in the palace. They proclaimed him emperor, bypassing senatorial debates. Many saw Claudius as a bumbling scholar with physical ailments, yet he surprised Rome with effective governance. He expanded imperial bureaucracy, employing talented freedmen like Narcissus and Pallas in administrative roles. Claudius also launched significant public works, improving the port of Ostia to ensure Rome's grain supply, erecting new aqueducts, and supporting literature and scholarship. Militarily, Claudius's major triumph was a conquest of Britain in 43 CE. Led by generals like Aulus Placius, Roman legions established control over much of southern Britain, awarding Claudius a glorious triumph in Rome. Nonetheless, Claudius's court brimmed with intrigue. His third wife, Messalina, was executed for alleged conspiracy. Then he married his niece, Agrippina the Younger, who maneuvered to secure the succession for her son Nero. In 54 CE, Claudius died, possibly poisoned with mushrooms at Agrippina's design. Rome now faced a teenage emperor, Nero. Nero's early reign, guided by philosopher Seneca and Praetorian prefect Pyrrhus, promised moderation. Nero cut taxes, hosted lavish games, and cultivated an image as a cultured patron of the arts. However, his relations with Agrippina deteriorated. He arranged her murder in 59 CE, claiming she was plotting against him. Freed from maternal oversight, Nero indulged in performances as an actor and singer, demanding the aristocracy attend. In 64 CE, a catastrophic fire engulfed much of Rome for days. Rumors accused Nero of starting it to clear land for his new Domus Aurea, or Golden House. To quell suspicion, Nero blamed Christians, initiating the first organized persecution of that sect. Rebuilding efforts introduced grander city designs, but resentment over the fire and forced expropriations grew. Meanwhile, Nero's expensive tastes and uncertain leadership strained finances, pushing him to levy new taxes. Local rebellions flared. The Jewish revolt in Judea, 66 to 70 CE, demanded major legions to suppress. By 68 CE, Gaulish legions revolted behind Vindex, Spain behind Galba. Deserted by the Praetorian Guard, the Senate declared Nero a public enemy, and he committed suicide. The Julio-Claudian lineage ended in chaos. Nero's death unleashed civil war. In a single year, 4 men claimed the purple. Galba, governor of Hispania, marched on Rome, but soon alienated troops by strict discipline and refusing to pay promised donatives. Otho, an ally-turned-rival, overthrew Galba, but was then challenged by Vitellius. Backed by Rhine legions, Vitellius's forces defeated Otho's at Bedriacum. Vespasian, a veteran general leading the Judean campaign, was proclaimed emperor by Eastern legions. His ally, Mucianus, marched on Rome. After Vitellius's short, disastrous tenure, Vespasian's supporters took the city in December 69 CE. Amid the bloodshed, Vespasian emerged victorious, founder of a new dynasty, the Flavians. Vespasian, 69 to 79 CE, was a tough, unpretentious soldier. He re-established discipline among troops, restored the state's treasury, even introducing taxes on latrine urine, famously ridiculed but practical, and began construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum, on the site of Nero's former lake. Vespasian strove to end the excesses associated with Nero, focusing on rebuilding confidence and finances. His eldest son, Titus, soon ended the Jewish revolt in 70 CE by sacking Jerusalem and destroying the Second Temple, an event etched deeply into Jewish history. When Vespasian died of illness, Titus, 79 to 81 CE, succeeded. A popular figure, Titus oversaw two massive disasters: the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, a major fire in Rome in 80 CE. He responded with compassion, financing relief for victims. He completed the Colosseum, staging inaugural games in 80 CE. However, Titus reigned briefly, dying unexpectedly in 81 CE. Titus's younger brother, Domitian, in 81 to 96 CE, inherited the throne. Initially, Domitian was an energetic administrator, strengthening currency, rebuilding Rome's infrastructure, and campaigning on the frontiers, notably the Danube. He insisted on overtly autocratic titles like Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, alarming senators used to Augustus's subtler approach. Paranoid about conspiracies, Domitian revived treason trials. By 96 CE, palace officials and Praetorians assassinated him. The Senate, relieved, damned his memory and chose an elderly senator, Nerva, to replace him, thus ending the Flavian dynasty. Over those 8 decades, Rome's principate evolved from Augustus's carefully veiled power to episodes of open tyranny: Caligula, Nero, Domitian. The system, however, proved resilient enough to outlive bad emperors. Both the Julio-Claudians and the Flavians showed that the key to ruling effectively lay in balancing the Senate's ego, the legion's demands, and the public's tolerance of imperial ambition. Caligula's bizarre spree or Nero's flamboyance might dismay senators, but only when the armies withdrew support did emperors fall. In 96 CE, the Roman world yearned for stability again. Nerva, though old, promised a calmer approach. More importantly, he began the practice of adopting a suitable successor rather than relying on blood lineage. This shift led to the so-called Five Good Emperors, whose era many hail as the empire's golden age. Yet the seeds of future crises remained. Reliance on the army's favor, intricate palace politics, and an empire so vast that each new emperor faced a delicate balancing act. For now, a fresh period of relative harmony dawned with Nerva, paving the way for Trajan, Hadrian, and beyond. The assassination of Domitian in 96 CE ended an era of frequent autocratic outbursts. The Senate's choice, Nerva, was a safe, elderly compromise. But his short reign, 96 to 98 CE, introduced a powerful new principle: adopting a capable heir rather than relying on familial descent. This practice yielded a century of relatively smooth transitions, culminating in the period of the Five Good Emperors. Under them, the empire flourished, reaching its apex of prosperity and territorial expanse, before drifting into the turbulence that would erupt in the 3rd century crisis. Nerva came to power with senatorial support, pledging to reverse Domitian's terror. He ended treason trials, recalled exiles, and tried to win popular favor. But the Praetorian Guard resented him for not avenging Domitian's assassination. Facing unrest among the legions, Nerva needed a strong military partner to secure the empire. So, in 97 CE, he adopted Marcus Ulpius Trajanus, Trajan, a respected general on the Rhine frontier, solidifying the principle that the empire would pick the best possible successor. When Nerva died naturally months later, Rome avoided a power vacuum. Trajan, the first emperor from outside Italy, he was from Hispania, displayed exceptional leadership. He advanced infrastructure, revalued the currency, and launched major public works, roads, harbors, and the Forum of Trajan in Rome, which featured the impressive Trajan's Column celebrating the Dacian Wars. On the military front, he annexed Dacia, 101 to 102, 105 to 106 CE, north of the Danube, tapping into its rich gold mines. That conquest is immortalized on Trajan's Column spiral relief, depicting detailed battle scenes. He also intervened in the east, waging war on Parthia, 113 to 117 CE, temporarily capturing Armenia and Mesopotamia. At its furthest reach, the empire spanned from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf. Trajan's policy, though ambitious, stretched logistics. Maintaining control in Mesopotamia proved difficult, and local revolts arose. Still, by the time of his death in 117 CE, Trajan was hailed as Optimus Princeps, the best ruler, famed for balancing conquest with just governance. He also instituted the Alimenta program, providing state-sponsored welfare for orphans and poor children. Trajan's mortal illness and sudden demise left the Eastern campaign incomplete, but he had already designated a successor, his cousin Hadrian. Publius Aelius Hadrianus, also Spanish-born, pivoted Roman policy away from conquest. He evacuated Trajan's newly seized territories in Mesopotamia and retrenched to defensible frontiers. In Britain, Hadrian built the iconic Hadrian's Wall in 122 CE, marking a stable boundary between Roman Britannia and Caledonian lands to the north. This shift reflected a more realistic approach, focusing on fortifications and local stability instead of endless expansion. A tireless traveler, Hadrian visited nearly every province, inspecting troops, settling disputes, and erecting monuments. He reorganized the civil service, adopting Greek-influenced administrative reforms. A passionate Hellenophile, he embellished Athens, constructing the vast Temple of Olympian Zeus and fostering cultural patronage. However, a second Jewish revolt, from 132 to 135 CE, erupted in Judea under Bar Kokhba. After Hadrian banned circumcision and founded a Roman colony on Jerusalem's ruins, suppression was brutal, resulting in immense Jewish casualties in diaspora. Despite that conflict, Hadrian stabilized the empire overall. Without a direct heir, Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius on condition that Antoninus in turn adopt the young Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. This chain adoption model further solidified the custom of picking skilled successors. Antoninus Pius presided over what some historians call the empire's most tranquil reign. A cautious man, he refrained from major wars, rarely left Italy, and trusted provincial governors to maintain order. Peace and economic growth flourished. The empire's finances stayed healthy. He minted stable coinage and undertook some building projects. Albeit modest compared to his predecessors, an attempt to push frontier lines in Britain, the Antonine Wall, was half-hearted and soon abandoned. Antoninus emphasized legal refinements and treated the Senate with respect. By avoiding grand campaigns or oppressive taxes, he nurtured loyalty across the provinces. When Antoninus died peacefully, power passed to Marcus Aurelius and his adoptive brother Lucius Verus. Verus handled an eastern war against Parthia, but died in 169 CE. Marcus governed the empire during a challenging phase market by the Antonine Plague, likely smallpox, brought back by legions from the east. The plague devastated populations, draining manpower and revenue. Meanwhile, Germanic and Sarmatian tribes pressed the Danube frontier in the Marcomannic Wars from 166 to 180 CE. Marcus spent much of his reign on military campaigns near the Danube, personally leading legions in grueling defensive battles. His meditations, penned during these campaigns, reveal a stoic philosopher grappling with duty and hardship. Despite struggles, Marcus Aurelius maintained the empire's integrity. Yet his choice to make his son, Commodus, co-ruler in 177 CE, broke the tradition of adopting a proven heir. Critics see this as a turning point. Once Marcus died in 180 CE, Commodus unraveled much of the stable governance established by the adoptive emperors. Commodus, barely 18, sought personal indulgence, fighting in the area as a gladiator, emulating mythic heroes, and draining the treasury on lavish amusements. He delegated power to corrupt favorites. Plots and conspiracies proliferated. He responded with executions and confiscations. By 192 CE, the Praetorian prefect and court members, fearing for their lives, assassinated him. The empire again slid into civil war. In less than a century, Rome experienced its pinnacle of stable rule, marked by calm succession, economic flourishing, and frontier security, and ended with Commodus's fiasco. The 2nd century's Pax Romana was genuine, but cracks emerged. Plagued morality, barbarian pressures on the Rhine-Danube line, and rising reliance on the army's loyalty. Commodus's death triggered yet another power scramble, eventually won by Septimius Severus in 193 CE, founding the Severan dynasty. Over the next decades, that dynasty would both strengthen the army's centrality and sow seeds for the 3rd century crisis. In summary, the High Imperial era underscored how well the Principate could function when skillful emperors selected worthy successors. Nerva to Marcus Aurelius showcased prudent governance, expansions balanced with consolidation, and a synergy between the Senate and the emperor. But the system was still vulnerable to an unfit heir, Commodus, and external shocks like plague or barbarian invasions. As the 3rd century began, Rome's formidable empire faced mounting challenges that threatened to tear it apart. As the Severan dynasty took charge in 193 CE, cracks in the empire's stability were already evident. The professional army, while formidable, gained heightened influence over who could become emperor. Economic strains, barbarian incursions, and internal rivalries escalated. By 235 CE, Rome entered a half-century of near-constant turmoil called the 3rd century crisis. Rapidly changing emperors, often proclaimed by their legions, drove the empire to fragmentation, compelling radical restructuring by Diocletian at century's end. Septimius Severus, 193 to 211 CE, emerged victorious after Commodus's fall in the subsequent civil wars. A general from Africa, he prioritized the army's loyalty, raising soldier pay, allowing them to marry, and expanding the Praetorian Guard with his own men. The Senate lost clout as Severus sidelined them, famously advising his sons to enrich the soldiers, scorn all others. Severus waged campaigns in Mesopotamia against the Parthians, boosting Rome's eastern frontiers. After his death, his son Caracalla, 211 to 217 CE, succeeded. Best known for the Constitutio Antoniniana, 212 CE, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free subjects. Ostensibly to unify the empire, it also increased tax rolls. But Caracalla's reign featured heavy spending and brutality. He killed his brother Geta and was eventually assassinated by an officer. The line stumbled on with ephemeral rulers like Elagabalus, famed for religious eccentricities, and Severus Alexander, 222 to 235 CE. Severus Alexander tried reconciling with the Senate, but lacked strong control of the regions. When Germanic threats worsened on the Rhine-Danube frontier, Alexander's attempt at diplomacy offended his troops, who mutinied in 235 CE, killing him. Thus ended the Severan dynasty, and with it, the last vestige of a relatively coherent principate. Rome now plunged into a vortex of invasions and internal betrayals. Over the next 33 years, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne, many holding power only months before being slain in battle or assassinated by rivals. This era saw repeated Germanic incursions across the Rhine and Danube, with the Goths, Alemanni, and the Franks, and the emergence of the Sasanian Empire, replacing Parthia in Persia, which pressured into Syria and captured Emperor Valerian in 260 CE. Additionally, the plague, possibly a continuation of smallpox or a new epidemic, further reduced manpower and morale. Amid the chaos, local strongmen carved out breakaway states. The Gallic Empire, 260 to 274 CE, controlled Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain under generals like Postumus and Tetricus. In the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra declared autonomy, overrunning Egypt and Asia Minor. The central Roman government, whipsawed by constant palace coups, struggled to respond effectively. A glimmer of stability arose with Claudius Gothicus, 268 to 270 CE, who defeated a massive Gothic invasion and restored some order before dying of plague. Next came Aurelian, 270 to 275 CE, an energetic general who quickly suppressed unrest in Rome and turned to reconquer breakaway regions. He recaptured Palmyra in 272 to 273 CE, disposing Zenobia, and negotiated or defeated the Gallic usurpers, earning the title Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. Aurelian effectively reunited the empire. He also built the monumental Aurelian walls around Rome, acknowledging that barbarian raids might threaten the capital. Yet his success was short-lived. In 275 CE, palace conspirators murdered him, and the cycle of short-lived emperors resumed. The continuous wars and power struggles devastated agriculture and commerce. With each new emperor raising troop pay, the coinage was heavily debased. Silver coins contained even less silver, fueling hyperinflation. The empire's tax system sagged under corruption and local disruptions. Cities walled themselves, trades contracted, and many provinces turned inward, adopting partial self-sufficiency. Even so, Roman identity persisted. Local aristocrats still yearned for stability, and the legions, though fractious, recognized the concept of one Roman Empire. Stability arrived again in 284 CE when Diocletian, a Dalmatian soldier, seized power. Unlike prior claimants, Diocletian survived initial rebellions and systematically reformed the empire in what historians call the Dominate, distinguishing it from the Principate's illusion of republican tradition. Tetrarchy. Diocletian appointed a co-emperor, Augustus, in the west, Maximian while he ruled the east. Two junior emperors, Caesars, assisted each Augustus, Galerius under Diocletian, Constantius under Maximian. Each Caesar was groomed to succeed the senior emperor, ensuring a planned transition. This fourfold rule spread imperial responsibilities across separate courts, each controlling a region's armies, ideally preventing usurpations. Administrative overhaul. Diocletian multiplied provinces from about 50 to over 100, grouping them into larger dioceses overseen by vicars. This reduced the power of any single governor and provided more direct control. He also reorganized tax assessment, tying farmers more tightly to their land, ensuring a stable revenue stream for the army. Price edict and currency. Attempting to curb runaway inflation, Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, 301 CE, setting fixed ceilings on wages and goods. Non-compliance was widespread. The edict largely failed. Still, he tried standardizing the coinage, minting a new silvered bronze coin and gold aureus. Results were mixed, but these measures underscored the crisis levels of the economy. Religious policy. Diocletian fiercely upheld traditional pagan worship. In 303 CE, he initiated the Great Persecution against Christians, ordering churches destroyed, scriptures burned, and Christians forced to sacrifice to the gods or face imprisonment, torture, execution. The policy was unevenly enforced by his tetrarchic colleagues. Although intense, it was ultimately the last grand persecution, overshadowed by the rise of Christianity soon after. In 305 CE, Diocletian and Maximian voluntarily abdicated, compelling the Caesars to become Augusti. This was unprecedented. No emperor had peacefully retired. Diocletian hoped the Tetrarchy's cycle of abdications would continue smoothly. But power struggles soon re-emerged, culminating in a new civil war from which Constantine emerged triumphant. Despite the Tetrarchy's collapse into civil strife, Diocletian's reforms permanently changed the empire. He replaced the old principate with a more openly imperial monarchy, the Dominate, in which the emperor was revered as a near-divine lord. The provinces, reorganized into small units, recognized an emperor stationed nearer the region. A larger bureaucracy and expanded army gave the empire better defense capability. The empire had survived the 3rd century crisis, but at the cost of greater centralization and heavier economic burdens. By 305 to 306 CE, as Diocletian lived out retirement in his palace at Split, the stage was set for the next era. Constantine, who would fuse these reforms with a radical embrace of Christianity, found a new capital in the east and redefined Rome's religious destiny. The Western Empire's path to decline and the Eastern Empire's rise both lay ahead. Yet for now, the Roman world was exhausted by decades of soldier emperors, thankful for whatever new order might bring stability. When Diocletian abdicated in 305 CE, his tetrarchic plan unraveled quickly. Ambition, dynastic claims, and the troops' preferences sparked a fresh round of civil wars. One leading figure soon emerged: Constantine, the son of Constantius, the Western Caesar turned Augustus. Over 2 decades, Constantine consolidated the empire under his sole rule, introduced profound religious changes by endorsing Christianity, and laid the foundation of a new capital at Byzantium, soon renamed Constantinople. Upon his father's death in 306 CE at Eboracum, York in Britain, Constantine's troops proclaimed him Augustus. This clashed with other claimants, Maxentius in Rome, Galerius in the east, and later Licinius. Constantine maneuvered skillfully, forming and breaking alliances. In 312 CE, he marched on Italy to face Maxentius. According to later Christian tradition, on the eve of battle at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine had a vision of the Chi symbol, the first 2 letters of Christ in Greek, and heard, "In this sign, conquer." He placed the symbol on his soldiers' shields. The next day, Constantine crushed Maxentius's forces. Whether miraculous or shrewd propaganda, this victory elevated Constantine's status. In 313 CE, he and Eastern co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious toleration to Christians across the empire. But rivalry flared between Constantine and Licinius. By 324 CE, Constantine defeated Licinius in a final civil war, becoming sole Augustus of the entire Roman Empire. He thus ended the Tetrarchy and reigned supreme. Although Constantine did not outlaw pagan worship, he favored Christianity with privileges, returning confiscated property to churches and appointing Christians to key offices. He intervened in theological disputes, notably presiding over the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, which condemned Arianism and produced the Nicene Creed. defining Christ as co-eternal with the Father. This was unprecedented, an empire-shaping doctrine of once persecuted faith. Clergy received tax exemptions. Sunday was declared a day of rest. Over time, Christianity gained institutional prominence, with bishops in major cities wielding considerable influence. Historians debate Constantine's personal faith. Some see him as a pragmatic syncretist, mixing Christian and Sol Invictus, sun god symbolism. He received baptism only on his deathbed in 337 CE, a not uncommon practice of that era. Yet politically, his championing of Christianity transformed the religious landscape. By the 4th century's close, the faith had spread widely, and future emperors would formalize it as the state religion. Constantine recognized that the empire's political and economic gravity was shifting east. In 324 CE, he chose the strategic site of Byzantium on the Bosporus to build a new capital. Soon called Constantinople, City of Constantine. Officially dedicated in 330 CE, Constantinople boasted strong walls, a deep harbor, and easy maritime connections to the rich eastern provinces, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt. Ornamented with grand forums, churches, and palaces, the city was declared a new Rome, endowed with a senate and civic privileges. This location symbolized the empire's pivot toward a Greek-speaking, urbanized East. Over subsequent centuries, Constantinople's wealth and fortifications would help it survive barbarian onslaughts that ravaged the western provinces. Constantine's last years saw him maintain a dynasty-based approach. He designated his 3 sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans, to jointly inherit. Upon his death in 337 CE, the empire partitioned among them, but further civil wars erupted, culminating in Constantius II ruling as sole emperor by 353 CE. Another relative, Julian the Apostate, 361 to 363 CE, briefly attempted to restore pagan worship as a unifying faith, but died in a Persian campaign. By 364 CE, the empire again found itself under multiple rulers, leading into a precarious east-west division. A key figure, Valentinian I, took the west, his brother Valens the east. Coordinating policy across such splits proved challenging. In 378 CE, a major shock jolted the east. Emperor Valens confronted invading Goths at the Battle of Adrianople and suffered a catastrophic defeat, losing his life. This event underscored how dangerous barbarian migrations could be. Gothic federates were allowed inside the empire, but poor management turned them hostile. The new Eastern Emperor, Theodosius I, 379 to 395 CE, eventually made peace with the Goths by settling them as foederati. Meanwhile, in 394 CE, Theodosius reunited the empire by defeating a usurper in the west, but unity was fleeting. Upon his death in 395 CE, Theodosius willed the empire's administration to his sons Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, effectively finalizing a permanent east-west split at the highest level. Theodosius also accelerated the Christian transformation. In 380 CE, he issued the Edict of Thessalonica, making Nicene Christianity the sole orthodox faith of the empire and proscribing Arian or pagan worship. By 391 CE, he banned the old pagan rites altogether, shutting down temples. The city of Rome, once the bastion of Jupiter and Mars, saw its venerable shrines abandoned or converted. In the east, Greek-speaking clergy rose to prominence, forming a robust ecclesiastical hierarchy that would shape Byzantine culture. A new era was dawning. Pagan Rome had given way to a Christian empire, while the administrative east-west divide set the stage for the Western Empire's collapse over the coming century, even as the East endured. Constantine's reign was a turning point. The Principate's veneer of old republican traditions dissolved. replaced by a more openly autocratic style akin to Diocletian's dominate. Emperors like Constantine donned royal regalia, distanced from the populace, reinforcing the emperor's divine aura. Bureaucracy expanded with new ranks of officials. The shift of the capital to Constantinople underscored that the empire's wealth and population lay in the Greek East, a region that would remain stable, culturally vibrant, and financially capable of withstanding repeated invasions. In the West, after Theodosius' death, the young emperor Honorius struggled to hold Italy and Gaul against barbarian groups. The frontier cracks widened. Goths and Vandals pressed inward. By the early 5th century, it became evident that the western half was nearing crisis. In the east, under Arcadius and successors, Constantinople's court consolidated power. Though it faced its own strife, it generally fared better militarily and economically. Thus, by 395 CE, Rome's empire was Christian in official worship. Governed by multi-layered bureaucracy and split into eastern and western segments, Constantine's role in bridging the old classical empire with a new Christian monarchy would shape medieval Europe and the Eastern Roman Byzantine identity for centuries. The next chapter details how the Western Empire unraveled under successive waves of barbarian invasions, culminating in the fabled date of 476 CE. While the East pressed on for another millennium. By 395 CE, Rome's imperial system stood divided between East and West. Theodosius I bequeathed the Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, to his son Arcadius, and the Western Empire, based in Italy, to his younger son Honorius. The eastern half, wealthier and more urban, would endure in some form for 1,000 more years. The West faced mounting threats that would culminate in its collapse by 476 CE, an event traditionally enshrined as the end of the Roman Empire in Europe, though in reality it was a gradual unraveling. Over the 4th century, various Germanic peoples, Goths, Vandals, Burgundians, and others, had been pushing against Rome's Rhine-Danube frontiers. The cataclysmic moment came when Huns, a nomadic group from Central Asia, swept into Eastern Europe, pressuring Gothic tribes to flee into Roman territory. After the Battle of Adrianople, 378 CE, where Emperor Valens was killed, the Eastern Empire contained the Gothic threat by allowing them to settle as foederati in the Balkans. In the West, however, the situation soon turned dire. In 394 CE, Theodosius had to reconquer the West from a usurper. When he died the following year, the 10-year-old Honorius inherited the Western throne. Power rested with his general Stilicho, a gifted Vandal Roman commander who strove to hold the frontiers. Meanwhile, the Visigoths under Alaric, disgruntled over unmet foederati demands, marched repeatedly into Italy. In 401 to 402 CE, Stilicho successfully drove them out. Yet a series of political blunders followed. The emperor's court grew suspicious of Stilicho's influence, culminating in his execution in 408 CE. Rome thus lost its best general just as the empire faced new barbarian migrations. Freed from Stilicho's checks, Alaric's Visigoths marched again into Italy. Under incompetent advisors, Honorius refused compromise. By 410 CE, Alaric laid siege to Rome and eventually captured it. For 3 days, Visigothic warriors sacked the city, seizing valuables and ransoming aristocrats. Though not as destructive as legend sometimes claims, Christian churches were reportedly spared. The psychological impact was immense. Rome, the eternal city that had not fallen to a foreign foe in 8 centuries, was humiliated. Church leaders like St. Jerome lamented, "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" And St. Augustine penned his monumental City of God, arguing that no earthly city, not even Rome, was forever. Alaric soon moved south, hoping to cross into Africa, but died abruptly. The Visigoths left Italy, eventually settling in southern Gaul and northern Spain, forming a Visigothic kingdom recognized by weak Western emperors. Meanwhile, large swaths of Gaul, Britain, and Spain began slipping from direct Roman control. In 406 CE, Vandals, Suebi, and Alans had crossed the frozen Rhine, overwhelming border defenses. Roman authority in Britain collapsed around 410, leaving local Romano-British populations to fend for themselves. By the 420s, Vandals roamed southern Spain and would cross to North Africa in 429, ultimately capturing Carthage in 439 CE. The West's economic mainstay, North Africa's grain, fell into barbarian hands. Some semblance of Roman resilience remained under generals like Flavius Aetius, called the last of the Romans. Aetius levered alliances with various barbarian federates to counter new threats, notably the Huns under Attila. The Huns devastated the Balkans, then turned west into Gaul in 451 CE. Aetius formed an unlikely coalition with the Visigoths and halted Attila's advance at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, also called Chalons. Though not a crushing defeat for Attila, it forced him to retreat. In 452 CE, Attila invaded Italy itself, but disease and famine in the Po Valley, plus a famous diplomatic meeting with Pope Leo I, saw him withdraw. Attila died the next year, and the Hunnic Empire collapsed soon after. Yet even this fleeting success could not stop the West's overall decline. Emperor Valentinian III feared Aetius's influence and personally murdered him in 454 CE. The next year, Valentinian was assassinated. With the Theodosian line in the West extinct, Ricimer, a Germanic warlord, became kingmaker, elevating and disposing puppet emperors at will. Meanwhile, Gaiseric's Vandals, entrenched in North Africa, sailed to Italy, sacking Rome again in 455 CE, more thoroughly than Alaric had done. Though the city's population survived, the name vandalism would forever conjure images of wanton destruction. From 455 to 476 CE, the Western throne changed hands multiple times. Real power resided in barbarian generals, many of whom served as masters of soldiers, magister militum. In 475 CE, Orestes, a Roman official of barbarian background, placed his teenage son Romulus Augustulus on the throne. Barely a year later, Odoacer, a Germanic foederati leader, rebelled when refused land grants. He captured and killed Orestes, then deposed Romulus Augustulus in September 476. Odoacer chose not to name himself emperor. Instead, he sent the Western imperial regalia to the Eastern emperor, Zeno, declaring no need for a separate Western ruler. Odoacer assumed the title King of Italy. This moment traditionally marks the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In practice, Roman institutions and the Senate in Rome continued to function under Odoacer's rule. Roman law and administration remained in place, but the Western imperial throne was gone, and local barbarian kings in Gaul, Spain, and Africa no longer answered to an emperor in Ravenna or Rome. Though 476 CE became a symbolic date, the process was gradual. Many provincial populations barely noticed a sudden break. Barbarian chieftains often preserved Roman taxation, language, and culture to leverage existing infrastructure. Over decades, distinct successor kingdoms emerged. Visigoths in Spain and Gaul, Burgundians near the Rhone, Vandals in North Africa, and eventually the Franks in northern Gaul. The Senate in Rome lost relevance, but lingered into the early 6th century. The Church in Rome, led by the Pope, gained increasing moral authority as the secular empire faded. Eastern emperors still nominally claimed to rule the entire Roman world. In 493 CE, Odoacer was overthrown by Theodoric the Ostrogoth, who ruled Italy as a de facto separate realm while acknowledging Eastern imperial titles. Thus, the western half was now a mosaic of kingdoms, each blending Roman and Germanic customs. The city of Rome itself, once heart of an empire, receded to symbolic significance. For centuries, later Europeans would reflect on 476 CE as the end of the Roman Empire. In reality, an empire calling itself Roman persisted in the East, centered in Constantinople, for nearly a millennium more. Nonetheless, the disappearance of a Western emperor proved epochal, heralding the start of barbarian Europe, where new polities took shape and Latin evolved into the Romance languages. The Roman army's disciplined legions gave way to smaller warbands of kings like Clovis the Frank, who declared themselves heirs to Roman prestige even as they minted new identities. This transitional period is often labeled the Dark Ages by older historians. Yet it was less about total collapse than a complex transformation. Roman roads, laws, and Christian institutions outlasted the empire's political unity. The last Western emperor, ironically named Romulus after the mythical founder, ended the line began by Augustus, a dramatic bookend to Rome's arc in the West. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Byzantine emperors would carry the flame of Roman governance, Greek learning, and Christian monarchy forward, forging their own story until 1453 CE. Although 476 CE is famous as the Western Empire's fall, the Eastern Empire, termed Byzantine by modern historians, lived on for nearly a millennium. These Eastern Romans still called themselves Romaeoi and saw Constantinople as the rightful seat of the empire. The Eastern half preserved Roman law, administrative structures, and imperial traditions while integrating Hellenistic culture and Orthodox Christianity. From 476 to 1204 CE, Byzantium weathered external invasions, religious controversies, and internal strife, occasionally reconquering portions of the West until a catastrophic event in 1204 fundamentally undermined their empire. Among Byzantium's great rulers was Justinian I, from 527 to 565 CE. Determined to restore Rome's old Mediterranean domain, his gifted general Belisarius swiftly defeated the Vandal kingdom in North Africa from 533 to 534 CE. Then, in the Gothic War from 535 to 554 CE, Belisarius and later Narses battled the Ostrogoths in Italy. They captured Rome in 536 CE, eventually seizing Ravenna and much of Italy. Though the prolonged war devastated the peninsula, Justinian's forces also grabbed a sliver of southern Spain from the Visigoths, forging a short-lived, restored Roman Empire. Yet these conquests were tenuous. A new threat, the Persian Sassanids, engaged Byzantine armies on the eastern frontier. Internally, the empire faced plague. The Plague of Justinian from 541 to 542 CE. A bubonic pandemic that may have killed millions. Nonetheless, Justinian left an enduring legacy: the monumental Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, the massive codification of Roman law called the Corpus Juris Civilis, encompassing the Code, Digest, and Institutes, and a revival of classical art forms. This golden age revealed Byzantium's capacity for both cultural magnificence and imperial ambition. Christian unity formed the backbone of Byzantine identity, yet theological rifts often erupted. The Monophysite controversy, over whether Christ had one or two natures, alienated provinces like Egypt and Syria, weakening loyalty to the imperial orthodoxy. In the 7th and 8th centuries, iconoclasm tore Byzantium internally. Some emperors, influenced by Islamic success and biblical prohibitions of images, opposed venerations of icons. Others supported icons as legitimate devotion. The first iconoclast period, 726 to 787 CE, began under Emperor Leo III, who banned religious images. Monasteries that cherished icons resisted, and popes in Rome condemned iconoclasm, widening the East-West split. Empress Irene restored icons in 787, only for iconoclasm to resurface from 815 to 843. Finally, in 843, Empress Theodora reaffirmed icon veneration in the triumph of orthodoxy, setting permanent Orthodox tradition. Externally, the 7th century brought a staggering blow. Arab Muslim armies erupted from Arabia under the banner of Islam. They overran Byzantine provinces in Syria in 636 CE, Palestine in 637 CE, and crucially Egypt in 641 CE. These lands, historically the empire's richest grain suppliers and tax bases, fell under the Rashidun and then Umayyad caliphates. Despite repeated attempts, Byzantium could not reclaim them. Arab fleets menaced the Aegean, besieging Constantinople twice, from 674 to 678, then 717 to 718. But the capital's formidable walls and the secret weapon, Greek fire, repelled the invaders. Byzantium survived, though in a reduced form. It regrouped around Asia Minor, Thrace, and southern Balkans, adopting a themes system to organize local militarized provinces for defense. By the 9th century, under the Macedonian dynasty, Byzantium experienced a cultural and military revival. Emperors like Basil I and Leo VI stabilized internal governance, reorganized the army, and regained some territory from the Arabs. The empire grew wealthier. Trade networks with the Muslim world, Italy, and the Slavs flourished. Missionaries Cyril and Methodius spread Orthodox Christianity and created the Cyrillic script for Slavic peoples, forging lasting ties with Bulgaria, Serbia, and Kievan Rus. Under Basil II, 976 to 1025 CE, Byzantium reached perhaps its medieval zenith. Basil crushed the Bulgarian kingdom, earning the nickname Bulgar Slayer, and reaffirmed control over the Balkans. Constantinople thrived as a dazzling metropolis, known for its gold coin, the solidus or nomisma, a stable currency accepted across Eurasia. Religious differences between the Latin West, Roman papacy, and Greek East worsened. Lingering disputes over theology, papal primacy, and liturgical customs led to the Great Schism of 1054, when papal legates and the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicated each other. Meanwhile, in the late 11th century, the Seljuk Turks hammered Byzantium at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, capturing Emperor Romanos IV and seizing much of Anatolia. Desperate, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos sought Western Knights' aid, igniting the Crusades. The First Crusade initially helped Byzantium reclaim some lands from Turkish forces, but subsequent crusades saw tensions with Latin crusaders. The most devastating blow came in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, when Western crusaders diverted to Constantinople and sacked the city. This grim event effectively ended Byzantium's high medieval power and ushered in a Latin Empire from 1204 to 1261 in Constantinople. While Greek successor states, Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus, claimed imperial legacies. Although Byzantines recovered Constantinople in 1261 under Emperor Michael VIII, Palaiologos, the empire emerged a shadow of its former self, politically fragmented and financially strained. Thus, by 1204, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire had reduced over 7 centuries past the Western Empire's fall. preserving Roman law via Justinian's Code, Greek language scholarship, and Christian orthodoxy. The empire had blocked Islamic expansion into Europe for centuries, shaped Slavic civilizations, and produced a rich artistic traditions, icons, mosaics, domed churches. However, the catastrophic sack of Constantinople by fellow Christians left Byzantium crippled. Over the next 250 years, Byzantium would cling to survival, overshadowed by rising powers like the Ottoman Turks, until its final defeat in 1453. Despite the tragedies of iconoclasm, Islamic conquests, and the 1204 devastation, the Byzantines' achievements in diplomacy, theology, architecture, and administration left a profound imprint on Eastern Europe and the broader medieval world. They saw themselves as Romans to the end, bridging ancient imperial heritage with medieval orthodoxy. Their next centuries, dominated by attempts to reconquer lost lands and navigate fractious alliances, would culminate in a final standoff at Constantinople's walls. But even during its decline, Byzantium remained a cultural beacon, safeguarding classical Greek and Roman texts that would later fuel the Renaissance in Western Europe. When the Fourth Crusade captured Constantinople in 1204, it tore the Byzantine Empire into fragments. Latin barons established a Latin empire in the capital, while Greek nobles formed breakaway states. The Empire of Nicaea, the Empire of Trebizond, and the Despotate of Epirus. For nearly 6 decades, Constantinople remained under Western control, with a puppet Latin emperor. Meanwhile, the Greek realms fought each other and the Latins, striving to reclaim the Roman seat. This chaotic era further weakened Byzantine resources, leaving it vulnerable to new threats like the Ottoman Turks. The Latin emperors in Constantinople never fully stabilized their territory. Greek resistance persisted, especially from the Empire of Nicaea, led by the Laskarid dynasty. They systematically reconquered portions of Western Asia Minor and eventually approached Constantinople itself. In 1261, while the Latin garrison was absent on a raid, Nicaean forces under General Alexios Strategopoulos seized the city almost without a fight. Emperor Michael VIII Palaeologicos of the newly ascendant Palaeologican dynasty made a triumphant entry, restoring the Byzantine Empire. However, the city was in ruinous condition, its population greatly diminished. The next 2 centuries would see a diminished Byzantium struggling to maintain viability amid rising Turkish powers in Anatolia and fractious Latin principalities in the Aegean. Despite political fragility, the Palaeologan period from 1261 to 1453 saw a cultural revival. Often called the Palaeologan Resistance, artists and scholars produced exquisite mosaics, iconography, and theological works. Philosophers debated classical Greek texts, bridging them with Christian thought. Byzantine diplomacy tried forging alliances with the West, but the memories of 1204 and continuing religious disputes, like attempts at union councils in 1274 and 1439, sowed distrust on both sides. Many Orthodox clergy resisted union with the Latin Church, seeing it as a betrayal of tradition. Meanwhile, each compromise aimed at Western military aid often failed to yield real assistance. In the vacuum left by the collapsing Seljuk Sultanate, new Turkish principalities emerged in Anatolia. One of these, led by Osman I in the late 13th century, evolved into the Ottoman Empire. Over the 14th century, the Ottomans expanded across northwest Anatolia and into Europe. Crossing the Dardanelles, they steadily encroached upon Byzantine holdings. Notably, after the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, The Ottomans dominated the Balkans, threatening Constantinople from multiple sides. The Byzantine emperors, seeing no alternative, often became vassals, paying tribute to sultans. Short-lived crusades like King Sigismund's campaign crushed at Nicopolis in 1396 failed to halt Ottoman progress. A pivotal moment was the Battle of Ankara in 1402, when the Mongol warlord Timur Tamerlane defeated the Ottomans, capturing Sultan Bayezid I. This temporarily fractured the Ottoman realm in a civil war among Bayezid's sons from 1402 to 1413. For Byzantium, this was a last reprieve. Emperor Manuel II used the opportunity to shore up city defenses, but the underlying reality remained bleak. By 1420s, the Ottomans, reunited under Mehmed I and then Murad II, resumed expansion. The Byzantine Emperor John VIII Palaiologos traveled to the Council of Florence in 1439, seeking Western aid by reuniting the churches. Despite a formal union declaration, most Orthodox faithful in Constantinople rejected it as heretical, and Western powers offered scant military help. In 1451, Mehmed II, a dynamic 19-year-old, became Ottoman Sultan. Determined to capture Constantinople, he built a fortress, Rumeli Hisar, on the European shore of Bosphorus to choke off city supplies. By April 1453, Mehmed's armies, perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 strong, surrounded Constantinople. Defending the city were around 7,000 troops, including a contingent of Genoese under Giovanni Giustiniani, plus remnants of Byzantine forces. Emperor Constantine IX Palaiologos prepared for a last stand. The city's formidable walls had repelled sieges for centuries, but Mehmed deployed massive cannon, including the huge bombard built by an engineer named Urban, capable of battering fortifications from a distance. For weeks, Ottoman artillery pounded the walls. Byzantines repaired breaches nightly, but exhaustion set in. Mehmed staged multiple assaults. On 29 May 1453, a final concentrated attack targeted the weakened sections near the Gate of St. Romanus. Giustiniani was gravely wounded. Panic spread. Emperor Constantine IX led a desperate defense, famously casting aside his imperial regalia to fight as a common soldier. He disappeared in the melee. Legend says he died fighting near the breach. The Ottomans poured into the city. Mehmed II entered Hagia Sophia, declaring it a mosque. The 3-day pillage saw churches ransacked, relics destroyed or carried off, and survivors enslaved or ransomed. Thus, Constantinople fell, marking the end of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire after roughly 1,100 years. Mehmed II, henceforth called the Conqueror, proclaimed himself Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of the Romans. The once glittering capital became Istanbul, the new seat of the Roman Empire. A handful of Byzantine holdouts like the Despotate of the Morea or Trebizond soon followed suit. Trebizond fell in 1461 and the Morea by 1460. Europe's medieval era pivoted that day. Some define 1453 as the end of the Middle Ages, referencing both the fall of Constantinople and the flow of Greek scholars fleeing west with ancient manuscripts. Even in its final decline, Byzantium's cultural and intellectual heritage was profound. Constantinople had been a treasure house of Greek classics. Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, preserved meticulously in monasteries and imperial libraries. After the city's fall, numerous Greek scholars migrated to Italy, fueling the Renaissance with their knowledge of Greek language and texts. Art forms like icon painting found new havens in Orthodox Slavic lands. The concept of an emperor ruling with both secular and religious authority influenced czars in Russia, Moscow as the Third Rome. Greek orthodoxy spread across Eastern Europe, shaping liturgy and ecclesiastical traditions separate from Latin Christianity. Thus, the final conquest of Constantinople did not erase the Roman-Byzantine legacy. It simply passed pieces of it into the emergent modern world. While the West had long recognized the Holy Roman Empire as a successor in name, and the East's own lineage ended with the Paleologos dynasty, the reality was that Roman civilization, its laws, in Justinian's code, its city planning, its Christian worldview, lived on in myriad forms. The fall of 1453 closed the curtain on the last direct political entity calling itself the Roman Empire, nearly 2,200 years after Rome's legendary founding by Romulus. From the vantage point of 1453, the entire history of Rome spanned from humble huts by the Tiber, 8th century BCE, to a Christian fortress city on the Bosporus, 15th century CE. This 1,000-year continuum was marked by conquests, civil wars, golden ages, schisms, plagues, and transformations. Despite final defeat by the Ottomans, Byzantium had defended and perpetuated the Roman name, bridging the ancient classical world to the dawning modern age. The echo of Rome's glory still shapes laws, languages, art, architecture, and faith traditions across continents, testament to an empire that, though fallen, never truly vanished from the world's imagination.